we're about to transform this rundown Amiga into this party machine. Okay, so that's just some LED light, but still much better than before. Hello and welcome back to Noel's Retro Lab. Here we have an Amiga 500 sent to me by Patreon supporter Leo Albonisi. I think it's supposed to be working, so the goal today is to do some light upgrading to it. First of all, I need to clean it and probably do some retrobrighting given the state of the keys. The second thing I want to do is replace the internal floppy disk drive with a Gotek. And then finally, because it's going back to the United States, I want to change the power supply for something that works with 110 volts and it's more reliable than the default one. But first of all, let's see if it actually works. Let's start by having a look at the Amiga. It's not in horrible condition by any means. The case is a bit dirty, but that's nothing we can't easily deal with. The surprising part is how yellow the keys are. We're definitely going to need some retrobrighting there. Since I want to have a good reference to have both before and after shots in the exact same conditions, I'm going to write down the exact camera settings so there are no white balance issues. That's something that happens quite a bit with before and after pictures, and I've been guilty of that myself. I'm even going to go as far as to mark where exactly the tripod is so we can recreate this shot after we're done with it. And since we have it right here, I will also take a picture of the side of the case and the power supply. Surprisingly, the case is very yellow just on that side. Was it sitting next to a window for 20 years? Who knows? It's certainly a curious yellowing pattern. Before we do anything else, let's power it on. I'm going to be using my own power supply since I know that one works correctly and it also has the correct plug for me. And great, that's very promising. Let me put in an old workbench disk I have around. And yeah, fantastic. It looks like it's loading just fine. Yep, it loaded correctly and it's fully functional. So we won't have to do any repairs and we can focus on the restoration and adding the upgrades I had planned. This episode is sponsored by PCBWay. PCBWay is my go-to place for making PCBs for my projects and prototypes, and they're currently running a PCB design contest with different themes. So if you're interested in that, definitely check it out at PCBWay.com. All right, it's time to open it up and see what we find inside. Ooh, I guess it was never opened before. Yeah, the keyboard is so yellowed. So we have something under the keyboard and something on the trapdoor, which right away I see it has a battery, so I need to, is that corrosion? Yeah, we're about to see. But I don't know what this is. This is something attached to the keyboard. Time to get the torque screwdrivers out. The board looks in great condition in spite of some rust on the heat on the RF shield. Like this. I don't know where that's coming from, but the board looks great. And to remove the board now, we need to remove these nuts in the back. Yeah, definitely some marks of rust. And there it is, beautiful. Let's take a moment and just admire this board. It's a work of art. So let's see what the expansion was. Ooh, I see a lot of, or some corrosion there and there. I mean, it looks like a memory expansion. Those are probably memory integrated circuits. And that's probably a battery-backed real-time clock, so pretty standard expansion. If we're going to get this to work, we'll definitely have to fix some traces. Now, what is this? I wonder if this is not actually doing anything in the keyboard. This is maybe just one of those external on-off switches. Right. Okay, that makes more sense. Oh, interesting. I've never seen a switch of this kind. This is intended to be glued probably at the back. And at least the color matches the case, so that's pretty nice. And now time for some retrobrighting. This time I did things a bit differently from my usual method. Since the case isn't super yellow and this is the middle of the summer, I decided to try sunbrighting it. So that is de-yellowing the case by putting it out in the sun without any kind of peroxide cream. I first learned about it in the Retro Recipes YouTube channel, and I've tried it with a few minor things and it worked pretty well. But this is a little bit more yellow than what I've tried, so it's going to be a bit of an experiment. I've also decided to try the same thing with the power supply since I'm not that concerned if it remains a bit yellow. One added challenge is that I'm in northern Spain and the sun here isn't very strong and we have a lot of cloudy days, so we'll see if it works and how long it takes. The keys on the other hand are super yellow, so for that I'm going to go with the tried and tested method of liquid hydrogen peroxide, which always works well even at low concentrations. The power supply was pretty clean, so that one goes out in the sun right away, taking advantage of a rare sunny day over here in northern Spain. This case, it's not bad, but it's a little dirty. Especially here and all that. So before we can do anything about this yellowing, we really need to give it a really good scrub. So after a rinse, this is much better. There's still some rust marks in there, but this is the inside of the case and it's not doing any harm, so I'm not going to try to remove it. I would have to get some sort of acid or something, and I'd just rather not deal with it. The outside is great, so this doesn't need any more cleaning. But the top, on the other hand, is not looking great. There's some black marks in there. So for that, I'm going to move on to the 8-bit guy's favorite cleaning method, which is baking soda, and that usually does wonders for things like that. Okay, that disappeared right away. And there you go. After a fair amount of scrubbing, all of that is gone. And there was a front area as well here that had those black marks, all gone as well. So yeah, this is looking great already. And now we can put the case out in the sun. I'm going to be putting it this way so the edges are facing the sun as much as possible. And before we can attempt to do anything in here, we definitely need to clean it. It's not just yellow, it's actually just really dirty. Wow, so that is the color that we would like to restore the keys, if at all possible. That's the original color showing through under the sticker. Just like the other times, I need to clean each key individually. I actually had to scrub quite a bit to get all the grime off. And this is what they look like after they've been cleaned. So, much better, but still very yellow. So there's no doubt about it. We definitely need to retrobright this. So for these keys in particular, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the liquid hydrogen peroxide method, and I'm going to put them in a Ziploc bag and fill it up with hydrogen peroxide. I chose a big bag like this to let the keys have enough room to spread out. I don't want to have multiple layers. So the idea is that we can really flatten it like that and in the sun. And now we're going to put this, and hopefully there will be no leaks. No leaks so far. That's encouraging. Okay, and I'm going to try to get as much air out of this as possible. And now we'll just spread it out like this in the sun. And there you go. So far the day is holding up and still pretty sunny, so there is some hope this will work out. And while we're waiting, let's look at the first major upgrade. I wanted to replace the internal floppy disk drive with a Gotek. Now, I know that's not keeping the system pure and period accurate, but it's such a fantastic upgrade I hardly ever resist. It still gives you the feel of using floppy disks, which I prefer on an Amiga 500, over something like WH-Load, which I think seems better suited for higher Amiga models instead. Of course, once you start playing games that take something like 10 disks, then it kind of breaks down. But even so, I still think that for an Amiga 500, a Gotek is a must-have accessory. So here's the Gotek. The idea with this is that it emulates perfectly, or almost perfectly, a floppy disk drive. So the connection is identical to a regular floppy disk drive. So if you notice that, that's I think a 34-pin connector. And even the power is the same. And you can connect this instead of this, and the computer will still think that it's using a regular floppy disk drive. Even the form factor is very similar, so it probably has the same kind of holes for screws in the bottom as it does a floppy disk drive. So a lot of the times you can just screw this into place of the floppy disk drive and you're pretty much good to go. However, it's not quite so simple here. Almost, but not quite. First of all, we need to flash the firmware on the Gotek because it doesn't come prepared with the firmware that I prefer that works in all these retro computers, which is flash floppy. So let's see what's inside. And this is it, really. We have a segment display here, which we're not going to use. And it's a really simple board. And really the main element here is a microcontroller. And this is a Cortex one, but the newer Goteks come with a different microcontroller. It's the Artery one, and that one needs to be programmed slightly differently, but you can find the instructions on the website. In order to flash this, we're going to have to connect a serial programmer to these pins in here. So first thing we need to do is solder some pin headers. What we need next is a USB to TTL adapter. So these are very cheap. I don't know exactly, 4 or 5 euros. And they connect to the computer, and they just have a few wires, which is mostly VCC and ground, and then receive and transmit. So there are a couple things that we need to do. The first thing is we're supposed to connect these 2 pins in here, which I think is 3.3 volts, to this one, which signals to the board that we want to program it. Then we can power the board, so we can connect 5 volts to here and ground to there. And then the only other 2 cables that we have left, well, there's another one here, but it's not connected anywhere. So that one is not connected. We have green and yellow. Receive is yellow. We're supposed to connect it to the transmit on the board. And transmit is this one. This one is transmit. We'll hook it up to receive. Just like that. So now we are ready to program it. Flash Floppy is an open source firmware by Keir Fraser for Gotek devices. It supports a lot of different computers, is very configurable, and it also supports several hardware add-ons like OLED screens, like we'll see in a second. It comes with a lot of documentation and a great installation guide showing all the steps we're about to do. Once we have the Gotek correctly connected and the firmware downloaded, the rest is pretty straightforward. We start by connecting the USB to TTL adapter to the computer. It's important that the computer correctly detects the new device as a new COM port. Then we launch the program specifically designed to program Cortex microcontrollers. It should have the correct COM port already selected, and we can just click Next. Because this is the first time we're flashing it, it's going to warn us that the microcontroller is protected. We need to click on Remove Protection. For the next step, we can just click Next. And this is the final screen, and is where we finally select the Flash Floppy firmware file. We need to use the .hex one. Then you press Next again, and it starts the flashing process. By the way, this is only something you need to do the very first time you program Flash Floppy. After that, to upgrade to the latest firmware, we just copy the firmware image in the USB stick and pop it in. Can't get any simpler than that. And that's it. Flash Floppy is uploaded and ready to go. Let's take a moment to check on the keys and flip the bag so they get sun on both sides. It looks like it's developed a slow leak, but so far it's holding up okay, so hopefully it will last long enough. To see if it's working, what I'm going to do is I'm going to connect the OLED screen. Now this is an optional mod. This is not what it came with originally, but this is way more usable than that segment display that I had in there. And so for that is just 4 connectors, ground, VCC, and 2 signals, and they use the same connector as the segment display. And then to power this, for now, I'm going to use this repurposed USB cable. And when I turn this on, we should be able to see there that it says, if all went well, it should say Flash Floppy and the version we used. And there you go. Perfect. I think it doesn't say anything else because I don't have a USB card inserted there. And there you go. Now we see the different directories and files and everything there. So I think this seems to be working. There is one more mod that I really like to do with Gotek, and that is to add an audio feedback whenever it's accessing a file or reading a file. So that serves a little bit as kind of replacement for the floppy disk drive noise, but it's a lot more subtle and a lot more pleasant, but it lets you know that it's working. And it's also really, really simple. All you need is a piezo buzzer like this, a passive one, and 2 cables. And you just literally connect it like that, and to this part of the floppy connector. This is the activity signal. And that is it. Normally I would probably tape it somewhere so it doesn't rattle around, and then maybe you can put it somewhere that maybe amplifies the sound a little bit if you want to, or you can put it somewhere that muffles it. That's up to you. Since we don't need the case to test this, let's do this right now. I'm going to plug in the Gotek here, and something with the power. I'm just going to hold it to prevent any shorts, and if it all goes well, we should be able to see the disk image. We should be able to select Workbench and boot up the Amiga from this. There you go. And you can hear the buzzer as well. So this is perfect. It's working great. There we go. We got Workbench working perfectly fine. So after 8 days of taking this out and putting it out in the sun, this is what we have. It's certainly better than it was, but it's not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. Now, to be fair, of those 8 days, only 2 days were perfectly sunny, and the other days were a mix of clouds and sun, but that's about as good as you get around here in the summer. So I don't know, this particular method for this case, it didn't work very well. The power supply, it's kind of even worse. This was sitting there in the sun for the same amount of time, and without a before and after, I can't even tell if it's any better. I think it's a little better, but it's still really, really yellow. So yeah, not really impressed with that method for at least the sun that we have in here. Now, it doesn't mean that it doesn't work. At the same time I put out those 2 pieces of equipment, I put out this Microsoft mouse that I got a while ago. And unfortunately I didn't take any pictures because I didn't think this was going to be part of the video, but this was pretty yellow. And it turned back into the perfect creamy white color that it's supposed to be. And actually it only took about a couple of days. So I'm really surprised that we didn't get better results with this. Anyway, that's what it is. I'm not really too concerned about the power supply. It's usually out of the way. And this, I mean, this is better. And again, it's not a big thing in the middle. So instead of trying to do some other retrobrighting, which you always risk potentially making it worse, I'm just going to leave it like that. And hopefully the keys will come out better. And overall, we should have a much better case. So now it's time to put the Gotek in place. And this is where normally the drive would go, right there. And like we talked about before, Goteks have a very similar physical structure. So we could technically put it right there. Putting the Gotek here would make it pretty much impossible to push the buttons, put in the USB stick, and certainly we have no room to put the screen itself. So even though it fits perfectly fine in the slot where the floppy disk drive would be, this is not a good solution. So instead what I did is I had this bracket printed. This is publicly available in Thingiverse. I put a link to it in the description, and it's specifically designed to put a Gotek drive internally on an Amiga 500. And so this fits perfectly fine here. Notice that even fills in the hole where the eject button would be. And then the Gotek itself fits here perfectly, just like that. So now, with the Gotek securely in place, we can carefully put the top case on top, and we have barely room to touch the 2 buttons and put in the USB stick. But wait, what happened to the screen? I'm glad you asked that. Technically, there's room here to put the screen. And yeah, you could do it, and then you have to like bend down and look at this completely sideways, and it's really unusable. So we're gonna do something different. This is the normal view you have of the machine when you're working with it, and yeah, you may even have a real keyboard. And clearly having to bend over into the side to look through that slot to look at the screen is completely out of the question. So the same person who designed the bracket for the Gotek also designed this little tiny piece to put here, and that is where we're going to put our screen. So if you remember, the screen has only 4 wires, and what we're going to do is we're going to run them through the case. And no, we're not going to break the case. These slits here, they're not just for decoration, but they have a hole in them. There's a space in there for a cable maybe to go through. So I'm going to attempt to pass all 4 of them through there so we can install the screen on the outside of the case. Since these cables are too thick to fit through the slits in the case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a similar cable to this, but with much thinner wire. It should be perfectly fine as far as the voltages and the signals and all that, but we'll be able to put those through the case no problem at all. All right, I just made a much smaller version of this cable, much thinner version. So now let's put it through the case and assemble everything. Yeah, they go through no problem. There we go. Now that we've threaded the cables through there, all we have left to do is remove the protection. Let's not forget that. And then put it inside its cute little case that even says Amiga on the back. Although on the back you're not really gonna see it, but it's a cute thought anyway. And so that goes there. And then we put a lid slash prop in the back. And now we just need to hold it in place. And for that, just for the moment, I'm going to use hot glue. Hot glue is not going to damage the case, it's not permanent, it can be moved later on, so I think that will work okay. And here are the keys after they came out of the retrobrighting process, and it's better than before, but it's not perfect. You can kind of still see the circle, so it didn't quite reach the white color that it was supposed to get. And then they're a little uneven, so some keys look okay, like this, but then that's probably the color it was supposed to be, and then some other ones are a little bit more noticeably yellow, like this one. So, I mean, there's no doubt that overall it's going to be better, but this didn't go back to the perfect original color, which, you know, I guess it happens sometimes. So let's put it on the case and see what it looks like all put together. Yeah, that looks fantastic. Compared to how yellow it was before, this is such an improvement. Okay, let's put it back in the computer and have some after shots so then we can compare the difference. So let's start with how the Amiga was at the beginning, and this is how it ended up. What a difference. And remember that the difference in the case from this angle was mostly just giving it a really good clean. Sure, the keys are not perfect, but it's a huge improvement anyway. And from the side with the power supply, this is how we started, and this is the end result. So not nearly as dramatic there. It's better, but the sun method of retrobrighting let us down a little bit. I may still try it again in the future, but it would be for things with very, very light yellowing. And now let's test everything together. I'm going to launch one of my favorite games from the time, Defender of the Crown. I chose this one in particular because it uses 2 discs, so it will give us a chance to change disk images in the Gotek. There we go, now it's asking us to insert disk 2, so I can press the up button on the Gotek and it changes the disk image, and off it goes and continues to load. Great, it loaded perfectly. Now I'm gonna have to host some tournaments. To wrap things up, I thought about doing an 8-bit dance party like Adrian, but we can't really do that because this is a 16-bit machine, so I know, 16-bit dance party. And with the dance party going on, I just wanted to say that we made a lot of progress. We have a much better looking Amiga 500, but even more importantly, it's much more functional with the integrated Gotek. Unfortunately, we're out of time today, so I'm going to have to leave the power supply replacement and fixing up the RAM expansion for another episode. And also, depending how things go, I may look into a PyStorm accelerator as well, so we'll see. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I'll see you next time. If you enjoyed this video, please consider supporting Noel's RetroLab on Patreon or joining the membership on YouTube. Not only is that the best way to support this channel and allow me to continue making more videos, but you also get some extra perks like early access, ad-free videos, and more. Thank you again to all the supporters. See you next time.